Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Well, my darlings, I had so much fun with the Phantom Train that I am doing another in the same vein. I ran across a post on Reddit about phantom houses, and they've always interested me, so we're going to do the same thing this time around. We're going to look at legends, true encounters, and I'm going to finish it off with a retelling of a story I did a few years ago by Bo Bandy, opinionated in IMO, Phoenix House. One of the most well-known phantom houses is from Bachelor's Grove Cemetery in Chicago. If you recall, there's the famous photo of the woman sitting on the crypt, or on a bench, I believe it's a bench, in Bachelor's Grove. It's supposed to be an extremely haunted cemetery. There have been for years and years mention of a ghost house seen in the cemetery. Now, of course, this isn't your well-groomed, perfectly flat cemetery that you're used to. This is very wood-like. A gentleman by the name of Edward Shanahan had gone in after a number of years and took photos, and you can see something that doesn't look like the natural curves and looks like a building, though when he got up next to it, it was gone. There was no building of any kind standing there. The house in Bachelor's Grove Cemetery has been seen off and on for years and years, for more than 100 years. Often sounds of partying is heard from the abode, which can never be reached. When you turn a corner, where it was standing is just gone. Something very, very familiar, something that happens quite a bit. There was the case in Versailles, France, in the earliest 20th century of two women who were visiting the palace grounds and the gardens of Versailles. And they had a time slip, whether it was a time slip or a phantom house, who can say, and they spotted ghosts and buildings that no longer existed, and they claim even Marie Antoinette herself, which is quite odd. But that sounds more like a time slip to me. Nevertheless, I'd drop it in. There was a tale of a phantom house also that randomly showed up in Suffolk, England. It was seen a number of times. In 1860, a farmer named Robert Palfrey was out baling his hay when suddenly the air became quite cold when it was, obviously summer. That's when you bale hay. When he looked up, he's seen a majestic and pristine red brick house surrounded by green gardens nearby that he had never seen before in his whole life of living in the area. The house then vanished into thin air just as it had appeared. This house was seen again in 1922 by his great-grandson, James Cobbold, who was in the same area, and again the air became frigid, and he heard a loud whooshing sound as if a great amount of air had been displaced. And when they looked up, they noted the opulent 3-story double-fronted brick house. It was Georgian style and surrounded by blooming gardens, even though moments before there had been nothing there. After a few moments, the house was ensconced with some kind of fog or mist and blinked out of existence. In 1923, a young teacher and her student were walking through the same area and also had the same experience. They explained the imposing iron gates and the gardens, and the teacher asked the locals about it, and she was informed that no such home existed or had ever existed near there. The teacher and student returned the following spring, and there was nothing there. To quote her, "My pupil and I did not take the same walk again until the following spring. It was, as far as I can remember, a dull afternoon with good visibility in February or March. We walked up through the farmyard as before and out onto the road, where suddenly we both stopped dead of one accord and gasped. 'Where's the wall?' we queried simultaneously. It was not there. The road was flanked by nothing but a ditch, and beyond the ditch lay a wilderness of tumbled earth, weeds, mounds, all overgrown with trees, which we had seen on our first visit. We followed the road on around the bend, but there was no gates, no drive, no corner of a house to be seen. We were both very puzzled. At first we thought that the house and wall had been pulled down since our last visit, but closer inspection showed a pond and other small pools among the mounds where the house had been visible. It was obvious they had been there a long time." This was written by Edward Bennett in his 1934 book, Apparitions and Haunted Houses. In the early part of the 1940s, a young man named Edward Bentley was out passing out catalogs along South Hall Street for a clothing store when he came across a large Georgian-style house set some distance back from the road. He called out to his employer, a Mr. Aubin Davis. When they got there, there was nothing but brush and weeds, with no sign whatsoever of the grand house that had been seen. Suffolk seems to have a good number of sightings of mysterious phantom houses roaming about, especially in Rougham, and this has earned these spectral dwellings the nickname the Mirage of Rougham. The phenomenon has been reported into modern times. What do we consider modern nowadays, I wonder? Where's the cutoff? Including as recently as 2007, when Jean Battram and her husband were driving through Suffolk near Bury St. Edmunds when they spied a stately Georgian house, complete with picturesque blooming garden. On their way back, they wanted to see the stunning house again, but it was gone with nothing but a field where it stood. "I know I saw the house," said Bertram. "I can see it now, and I could sketch it if I needed to. It was a lovely big Georgian house with a row of long, tall windows and trees at the back of it. I've talked to other people, and they've heard of it, and people in Rougham have heard the tale. I would love to get to the bottom of it. At the time it happened, I knew nothing about this house at all. I was looking across some rough-plowed fields when I noticed this big house and remarked to my husband how nice it was. I had a quick look and saw these lovely big windows, and then thought I would see it again when I came back. But when we drove back, there was no house there." The House of Suffolk has been covered in a number of publications. Some people believe it to be a mirage or a trick of the eyes. Others suggest that it is a dwelling that usually resides in another dimension, which makes more sense to me if there's never been a house on that location, and that they briefly pop through to our dimension. But who knows? Tell me, you guys, down in the comment, what your theory is for these sightings. Brain chemicals, dimensional, ghosts, recordings in the earth of old places. Who knows? In the United States, there are also seen, naturally, as we already talked about, Bachelor's Grove, a Kathleen Louisa of Falls, Virginia, claims to have driven past an old manor called the Stone House, situated near Sudley Road, many times, and had always wondered about its history. The house was located among some of the old battlefields of the American Civil War and was steeped in history as well as a common landmark in the area. One night in 1986, Louisa went out to one of the old battlefields along with her mother and grandparents in order to gaze upon the passing Halley Comet. But as they approached the intersection where the Stone House should have been looming, it wasn't there. The baffled witness turned the car around and was finally able to locate an empty lot where the house should have been standing, but there was not a scrap to suggest it had ever been there in the weed-choked lot. The only thing that remained were the well and some fences. Puzzled witnesses figured that the house must have been unexpectedly torn down or relocated sometime very recently, even though it seemed as if a lot of the land was relatively untouched and didn't show any activity that would be there from such an moving or removal of. There was no rubble, no scars in the earth, no holes in the ground, not even the foundation walls. It just seemed to be a lonely piece of land. The group milled about and tried to figure out what had happened before moving on. 2 weeks later, the same group drove by the same intersection and was baffled that they saw the house once again as if it had never been gone. They all swore they'd seen the empty lot and were equally befuddled how the house could be there. She would insist that she had been living in the area her whole life and it had definitely not made any mistakes about the location. Now, there is the testimony of a Beverly Kish of Merrifield, Virginia, who claims that in January of 1997, she had her own experience with Stone House, which is thus. I experienced a ghostly encounter of sorts in January 1997, but I didn't know about it until I read about the lady, Louisa, who said she drove by the location of the Stone House and the house had disappeared. The same thing happened to me. I was living in Manassas at the time and wanted to take a drive one night. It was clear with the moon out. It wasn't pitch dark. I was alone, having lived in the area 20 years. I know exactly where the Stone House is. In fact, I took a tour there a couple of years ago. Yet on this night, it was gone. I even turned the car around and said to myself, that's funny, I'm at the right intersection. And all I saw was a patch of grass with the glow of the moon on it, where the house had been. And you can't miss this house. It's close to the road, so I can personally vouch for what the other woman saw, or rather, what she didn't see. That's rather a anti-phantom house? A disappearing house? Interesting take on it. There's a spectral house on Cuba Road in Lake Zurich, Illinois. The road meanders through some very affluent towns and is imbued with all manner of tales of the strange and reports of inexplicable and eerie spooky lights from the cemetery, as well as specters and ghosts. But the strangest of all lies along a side street called Rainbow Road. The area was previously home of an abandoned mansion estate that was so expansive that it had frequently been claimed to have been an old asylum that the gates had inexplicably changed position. The estate sits right by the infamous White Cemetery, which dates back to at least 1820, and known for numerous hauntings and bizarreness, including phantom vehicles, dancing orbs of light, and shadowy wraiths. And one particular house can certainly be added to this. It is said that there's a modest shack that occasionally will appear in the woods right next to the cemetery, which is inhabited by an elderly woman who is sometimes reported as holding a lantern. It is said that if one is to approach the house, it will simply vanish into thin air along with anyone who happens to be too close to it when it does. The house is supposed to be wreathed in spectral flames as well, leading to the theory that it is perhaps a ghost structure that was somehow imprinted onto the area in the wake of a tragedy, probably a fire that most likely took the old woman's life. Those are some fun stories, my darlings. Now I'll move on to the Reddit posts that caught my attention in the first place. This was from Glitch in the Matrix, I believe. This experience occurred when I was about 15, 16. I was also with a friend of about the same age and his dad. We were in the woods behind our houses. We lived in the same neighborhood. We went back into the woods many times to hike around and play paintball. One day we decided to go a little deeper into the woods just to check it out. A little background. This is an old growth forest, protected wetlands that are a few square miles and surrounded by roads on all four sides, located in the Northeast U.S. For a while we were wandering along. It was mid-late spring, so the forest was pretty lush and green, when one of us sees a small patch of white coming through the woods. It stood out pretty easily, contrast to the green leaves, so we decided to investigate. And the three of us headed off in the direction, towards this mysterious white spot coming through the leaves. If you've ever walked through dense woods, you'll know that it's difficult to walk in a straight line because of fallen logs and brush. Anyway, we kept walking towards this object for what seemed like a while. I've racked my brain, but really, I can't recall how long. But this white object still hadn't come into focus. It still looked like a white blot, and it's just as far away as when we first spotted it. We didn't think much of that at this point, or at least I didn't, and I continued walking in this thing's direction. It must have happened 2 or 3 times that we'd walk towards this thing for a few minutes and notice that we still weren't getting any closer. At this point, I think there was a little tension building, but nothing too out of the ordinary. At some point, though, as we are getting closer, we notice the object is starting to fill out. We can clearly see now that it is a tiny white house on a hill. I say the structure was about the size of a shed you might keep your lawnmower in. We were excited because of how often do you come across something like that? It's still a little ways away, but again, very obvious this little white house is what we'd seen. We'd been walking towards. So as we continue towards this little house, we lose it from sight momentarily as we go up and over another hill in front of it. But as soon as we get to the top of this hill, the small white house is gone. We are confused as hell, looking at each other, but keep walking to the hill we had previously seen this house on. This last part happened pretty quickly. We get to the top of the hill, still looking at the other hills close by to see if we just got turned around or something. And we'd seen the little house until one of us noticed an old foundation in the ground at the top of this hill, exactly where the house had been. The shape of the foundation was exactly the size of this mysterious vanishing white house. I barely had time to notice the foundation when all 3 of us heard a growling, like the sound that got louder until it was as loud as a chainsaw. Nothing was said, but the 3 of us, including my friend's dad, sprinted out of the woods in the direction we came. I don't recall ever discussing what happened with the other 2 I was with that day. Since this happened, I tried looking on Google Maps for some kind of indication the house was there, and we'd just lost it. But the forest top is too thick. About 1.5 years ago, I told my brother what had happened, and we went back into those woods looking for the house foundation, but didn't find anything. Although our search wasn't very thorough because it was winter so it was pretty cold. With snow on the ground, it was hard to pick out what might be the White House from the surrounding snow. And a reply to that by Fireproof Heart. When I was 16 or so, me and two of my friends went camping. Being the dumb teenagers we were, we decided to go for a hike near dusk and then go off the trail. We got lost in the woods as it quickly got dark. We thought we knew the way back to the path, so we tried to find it. At one point, we saw the roof of a house in the distance. We were so excited that someone may be around to help us that we quickly started towards it. Similarly to you, it never got any closer. And suddenly, after some dips and maneuvering around the trees, the house is gone. Afterwards, we 100% knew it was the forest tricking us to go further into the woods and get even more lost. It was nice to read a story similar to mine. I don't feel as crazy. And may I just insert here, don't follow the lights and don't follow the houses. Unless it's the lady with too many eyes. Someone asked them, "Did you get back or are you dead?" Fireproof Heart replied, "Had to spend the night in the woods with nothing but an axe and a flashlight. It really was the most terrifying night of my life. Coyotes came within 5 feet of us in the pitch black, and bugs were crawling all over us. In the morning, we found a hunter's perch and finally found the trail. I'm alive, but was really close to being lost in the deep woods forever." Messtradamus also replied, "Encountered a similar experience when I was young. I used to live on forest preserve land with a driveway that went almost half a mile into the woods. Friends and I would hear what sounded like faint drumming, chanting at night in the woods. Sometimes while we were enjoying campfires in the yard, we would joke that it sounded like Satanists performing rituals in an uneasy manner. So anyway, one time we went hiking in the woods in the direction of where we would often hear the noises coming from. We found what appeared to be a foundation of a small cottage, but also a large stone slab outside of the foundation that it was in the shape of what might be described as an altar. No blood or anything, but it really freaked us out. We went back in daylight multiple times after that, trying to figure out what it was we had seen, but could never find it. We still joke about the altar to this day." And someone mentioned that there was a missing 411 case. The story they'd got was from Mr. Ballin's YouTube channel that involved this rhythmic drumming. A boy was playing around in a stream or river in the woods when a man interrupted him, suggesting he take a break, and invited him to his cabin. He didn't want to be rude, so he followed him. When they got to their destination, he saw a family friend there, so he ended up staying for dinner and spent the night. The next morning, he worried about not having told his family, and the man led him back to a particular spot and gave him directions on where he would find his way back. At that moment, a member of the search party came running up to him, and he turned around to look back in the man's direction, and all the forest behind him was changed. The family friend was part of the search party, and the boy asked him why he didn't tell him he had been with him at the cabin. This family friend had no idea what he was talking about. And that's when the boy discovered that while he experienced having just spent one night at this cabin, he'd been missing for 3 days. And apparently when he was gone, there had been this drumming sound coming from the vicinity that stopped the moment he was found. Nobody could verify the existence of the cabin, and the area the boy had said it was in had been searched multiple times. I'm going to have to go find this because I swear I've shared this on one of my 411 videos, the young man and the people were First Nation or Native American. I believe First Nation. I believe this was in Canada. But, yeah, there you go. It sounds very much like a fake kidnapping to me. The discontinuity in time, the family friend, the whole thing. Anyway, someone replied, I had a very similar experience to this. I was around 16 and 17, hanging out in the woods along a trail by my house. We decided to walk a little further in and explore when I noticed what seemed to be a huge brick building with circular windows in the center that almost resembled a library. I pointed out to them and they saw the building and described the same thing I was seeing. I lived in that area for years at that point and was confused as to what that building was. So we decided to check it out. While walking closer and talking, we looked up after what could have been a few seconds, and anything resembling a building was gone. I vividly remember getting a chill down my spine and goosebumps and getting out of there. Our best theory was that it was just the way the leaves were laid out on the trees, and it was a 1 in a million chance. It seems like this sort of thing is, well, it is uncommon, but not unheard of. Now I bring you Phoenix House by Opinionated IMO, aka Bo Bandy. Deep in the woods at the edge of the Saginaw River lies the charred remains of a cursed dwelling. Over 100 years ago, it was reportedly reduced to ash and rubble by the manifestation of determined flames. Despite this judicious outcome, the mortal danger therein wasn't completely eliminated. The purifying fire didn't fully exorcise the evil that is said to dwell within. Between dusk and dawn on All Saints' Day, the bewitched ruins are said to rise up from the ashes like the mythical phoenix. It assumes its previous form and tries to lure unsuspecting victims. During those enchanted hours, any foolhardy soul who ventures through the threshold is said to be doomed to be stranded in the haunted past. All too soon, the unholy structure returns back to the mystical realm of spirits. The trapped occupant or occupants wander its labyrinth-like passageways and corridors forever. Like everyone else in this town, I'd heard all the local wide-eyed tales. The spectral mansion at the edge of the wilderness was one of the most popular, spellbinding yarns among the old-timers. Being a skeptic, I scoffed at hearing the fairy tale and dismissed it as being pure folklore. Any logical-minded person would have done the same, for that matter. About the only danger in such a remote area is the indigenous bear and snake population. At least those were my own words of wisdom when I originally heard the fanciful story. Years later, however, I happened to wander into the nearby woods and stumbled upon its fabled remains. At the edge of the charred ruins, I found a weathered tome, a stone's throw from the eastern wall of the raised dwelling. It was apparently penned by a man given to flights of diabolical fancy, or burdened with a terrible truth. I'll let you decide which is true. I can only vouch for the authenticity of the ruins. It is most definitely there. I, Samuel Archibald Hayne, have a cautionary tale to impart to you, my attentive reader. Many, if not all, will scoff at what I'm about to reveal. I implore you to consider my words with an open mind. It may just save your life. It is too late for me. I was on a hunting trip in the forest when I ventured into the Consaganaw Valley in search of my intended prey. Nightfall slipped up on me sooner than I expected. I set up camp for the night in a clearing at the edge of the creek. It was my hope that under hypnotic sounds of the swiftly flowing water would lull me into an instant slumber. Unfortunately, the gleaming moonlight was so bright that it shined through my closed eyes. I should have suspected that the glowing orb was luring me to my eternal demise, but I was still ignorant to its malignant nature. I immediately fell prey to its evil mission. My vision was drawn to the rays it cast on the opposite side of the creek. To my utter disbelief, a stately mansion stood perched atop the riverbank. There had been nothing but a shallow clearing in a remote location a few moments earlier. Of that I would have sworn to anyone. I rubbed my eyes, but the curious vision remained sharply in focus. I was immediately reminded of the old folk tales of the spectral house in the woods. I openly considered that I was only dreaming about the long-forgotten legend, but it all felt so real. I wasn't willing to dismiss it as an unconscious fantasy. I had to know. Of my state of consciousness, I was uncertain. The fact was that it didn't matter at the time. I had to see what was beyond the threshold. The heavy price I paid for that natural curiosity was eternal damnation. In this nightmarish limbo of lost souls that I dwell, I have cursed my fatal impulse 1,000 times. About the only consolation I have left is that I may be able to help others avoid my fate. If you are reading this warning, it is you that I wish to save. I staggered across the cool stream with hopes that it would shock me awake, but I had no such luck. Once I stood upon the other bank, I was but a stone's toss from the front door. The ominous structure bore the illusion of solidity, but there were hints to the contrary. An occasional glimmer of moonlight shined through the walls to betray its spectral status. I could feel the hairs on my neck stand on end as I sought the courage to step forward. A chilling wind at my back seemed to propel me towards it. After an eternity of indecision, I stepped up to the door and turned the rustic knob. It offered no resistance to my intrusion. In my nervous stupor, I failed to recognize the implicitly accommodating mechanism of a trap. Although I didn't know it at the time, my fate was sealed forever when the door closed behind me. Once inside, I had a surreal feeling that the outside world I came from no longer mattered. Reality began to slip away. Time itself held little meaning. The only thing that separated me from my freedom was just 3 inches of resistant wood, and yet I didn't care. Strange feelings compelled me to explore the mysteries of the upper floor. I marveled at how solid the banister felt as I walked up the spiral staircase of the damned. It was as if I was floating in a vivid, ethereal dream. Each step creaked of aged timber, but the expected echo of my footfalls were curiously absent. In retrospect, I realized the walls were not solid enough to produce an audible reflection. Ghost houses have ghost walls, I reminded myself. The stairs creaked not because of my weight. They creaked because my solid body intruded upon its semi-solid mass. In a large room upstairs, I found the glorious treasure of 10 kingdoms scattered from the floor to the rafters. It was only awaiting a fool to happen along and claim it all. I'm ashamed to admit that I became that greed-intoxicated fool. The trove of riches sparkled in the moonlight with an alluring glint. There were golden goblets and ornate pieces of jewelry littering the floor in waist-high piles, along with precious gems as large as a man's fist. I stuffed my bulging pockets until they were spilling over. Then I hung a dozen golden chains around my neck to flee the phantom house with as much booty as I could escape with. In all the chaos and monetary lust, I was in deep denial about my fate. As I went to depart, I was aghast to see that the staircase was nothing more than a faint reflection. I could actually pass my hand through the railing at the top. Frantically, I sought another avenue to escape the second floor, but there was none. A painful realization quickly set in. All the material riches in the world mean nothing to a man trapped in a lost realm of spirits. As if to put even more irony in my salted wounds, my bulging pockets were now full of worthless river sand. I could almost hear the unknown master of the house laughing at my predicament. The spirits of the determined can be hard to kill. Although disheartened, I still hadn't completely accepted my fate in Phoenix House. The survivor in me sought an alternative means to the ground. What first appeared to be a survivable leap changed when I witnessed that the downstore floor was nothing more than hazy mist. I could see the foundation 24 feet below. A fall from that height would mean almost certain death. At this time, I still had a fleeting hope of survival. Even that desperation was about to fade, along with all evidence of this accursed place. A new level of panic set in to my sinking resolve. I watched as the house burst into phantom flames and slowly faded away. Soon I was the only physical entity left in the smoldering ruins. Fear of the unknown brought me unprecedented anxiety. I couldn't fathom what my future held, and I couldn't wish that empty feeling on my greatest enemy. The truth is, there is no future here, and there is no past. I'm just part of Phoenix House now. One cog in a very complex entrapment machine. Time has no meaning within these walls. I am uncertain of how many years have passed since I fell prey to it. What remains of my former self is subject to the same arcane rules that all parts of the mechanism are bound by. I cease to exist for all but one brief period per year. Upon that anniversary, I spring into action and attempt to document this woeful tale in my journal. Each entry brings me closer to completion of my truthful testimony before the cycle ends. It's my hope that soon no one else will have to share my wretched fate. If you found this testament on the riverbank, then I must have found a portal to the outside world to toss it from. Please consider and accept my dire warning. You are very close to unimaginable danger. I can't implore you enough to avoid the accursed place and to flee from here immediately. Save yourself before it's too late. Signed, the trapped entity who was once Samuel Archibald Hayne. So quoth this raven. Thank you once again, my darlings, for coming to see me in my little chateau. I don't get out much these days, as many of us don't. But it does mean the world to me. Why else would I be reading these stories, if not for you? Special thanks to my membership and Patreon supporters: Creepy Clown Girl, Unicorn Smoke, Ermin Case, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, Tabby Cat, and of course, Charlotte Emerson and Cortez Williams. You guys are amazing. Have a lovely day, my darlings.